Hello and welcome back to our series of videos about the efferent division. In this video, we are going to be talking about the adrenal medulla, which is a special structure that holds special significance in the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so I'm going to start by introducing you to the adrenal gland. Okay, the adrenal gland is a gland that sits on top of your kidney. So you have two kidneys. You have one adrenal gland on top of each kidney, okay? The adrenal gland consists of two parts, an outer part called the cortex and a middle part called the medulla. I just want to mention here the terms cortex and medulla are terms that you're going to hear a lot in physiology, anatomy, etc. Cortex means outside and medulla means like inside or middle. So any structure that has an outside and a middle part will usually have a part that's called the cortex and a part that's called the medulla. Anyway, moving on about the adrenal gland, the adrenal cortex is an endocrine gland. So we kind of encountered that a little bit when we were talking about the endocrine system and the HPA axis. Cortisol is made by the adrenal cortex, but we will cover that some more later in the semester. The part that we want to be focusing on now is the middle part right here, the adrenal medulla. The adrenal medulla acts as a modified sympathetic ganglion, okay? So what do I mean by a modified sympathetic ganglion? Well, to illustrate this concept, let's start by looking at a typical sympathetic circuit. Okay, so remember, in a typical sympathetic circuit, we have a preganglionic neuron leading from the central nervous system to the autonomic ganglion. And then we have a postganglionic neuron leading from the ganglion to the target tissue. If we compare that to the circuit that controls the adrenal medulla, you can see that the beginning, like the first half of the circuit is the same. You have a preganglionic neuron leading from the spinal cord, the central nervous system, to the adrenal medulla. So you can see that instead of having the autonomic ganglion here, you have the adrenal medulla here. Okay, so that's what we mean by a modified sympathetic ganglion. It's basically taking the place of the autonomic ganglion in the circuit. Okay, so once the adrenal medulla receives input from the preganglionic neuron, what happens is that the preganglionic neuron stimulates these cells called chromaffin cells to secrete a neurohormone called epinephrine into the bloodstream. Okay, so instead of having a postganglionic neuron leading to the target tissue, with the adrenal medulla, we have these chromaffin cells secreting epinephrine into the bloodstream. Let's take a look at some details here. So one thing I want to say about chromaffin cells is they are basically modified neurons. So they're neurons without axons, okay? Also, epinephrine is also known as adrenaline. So I'm sure you all have heard the term adrenaline. You've probably also heard the term epinephrine, but those are the same thing. They're just different names for the same thing. And I just want to point out that's that's where adrenaline gets its name, because it's from the adrenal medulla. And then epinephrine binds to adrenergic receptors. So adrenergic is a word that is related to the word adrenaline, okay? Last thing that I want to say about this whole circuit is that this is really what's responsible for that fight or flight response that we see from the sympathetic nervous system. When you have epinephrine secreted into your bloodstream, that's like, you know, you hear about adrenaline coursing through your bloodstream. This is where that comes from, okay? And you can imagine once you have epinephrine in your bloodstream, it's going to reach your entire body. So any tissue, any cell that has an adrenergic receptor is going to respond to that adrenaline, that epinephrine in your bloodstream. Okay, so so that's like kind of what is responsible for that whole body global fight or flight response that you get when you are in a sort of an acute stress uh, situation.